For more on this, let's bring in today's political panel. With me now is the co-founder of South and Hill Strategies, Colin Reed, and Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck shareholder Al Mottur. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Man, Doge is all the talk of town, isn't it? Colin, do you think, especially when it comes to Doge, I think one of the things that Democrats have really focused on, these lawsuits have focused on, is giving Elon Musk access to this payment information and the inner workings of the government when he could have some serious conflicts of interest. Is that a problem?
Well, let's start with how we got here. This city is now finally having a conversation that's long overdue about the size and scope of the federal government. We're $37 trillion in the hole. And most people, when you talk to them, understand that government spends too much, there's waste in government, and there's inefficiency. Now, the Democrats have declared war on the Department of Government Efficiency. Ergo, they are putting themselves on the sides of inefficiency. So this is just an incoherent message. Are there going to be disputes about how and this happens? Perhaps, but we're finally having a conversation we need to have. And I noticed Congressman Maxine Waters, when she was busting into the Department of Education yesterday, she said to the security guards, "This is our money. We pay your salary." And that's just not true. Congress doesn't have money. Congress gets money from the taxpayers, and it's taxpayer money. And it just shows the fundamental misunderstanding of how this whole system should work and just the total lack of any sort of fiscal restraint.
Al, have voters basically said, we're not getting what we pay for from the federal government?
I mean, I think a lot of folks have said that. That was part of President Trump's campaign. And what they're doing with Doge, to some degree, delivers on the promise that they made in the fall. But let me just point out, when Elon Musk founded SpaceX, he told his engineers to blow up as many rockets as they could to see what worked best. But when you take an entity like USAID, the Treasury Department, the Department of Defense, which President Trump just said that Doge should focus on, we don't want to blow up every program. We would rather look at things carefully in a measured way. The video you had at the top of the hour pointed out that USAID saved 7 million babies from getting AIDS. Is that a bad thing? But if you just fired 13,000 and a half of the 14,000 employees, I bet that program's not working right now. So it's better to be precise. Yes, there's government inefficiency. Democrats ought to admit that there is bloat in government, number one. But once we admit that, we ought to be fighting for important programs like the one you highlighted in your show.
Colin, is there a risk of overreaching here from Doge?
Possibly, but we're just getting started, and we're finally having a conversation we need to. Al hit on an important point. There is inefficiency in government, but that's not what the Democratic leaders are saying. They're just saying we oppose all cuts across the board. I think John Fetterman, Democratic senator of Pennsylvania, had it right when he said his party's brand is toxic. And until they start to realize how far in the hole they are, they can't create a coherent message to offer a counterpoint of view.
Well, let's listen to that, actually. We do have Senator Fetterman here discussing the politics around the Democratic Party right now. Take a listen.
Why is the Democratic Party viewed as toxic by so many? Like, even people inside the party acknowledge that.
I think their primary currency was shaming and scolding and talking down to people and telling them, hey, I know better than you.
Al, how did Democrats get here, and how did they get out of this position?
Well, first of all, I think Senator Fetterman is onto something. There is an out-of-touch sense in the Democratic Party with respect to rank and file voters. In this last election, we did really well among the highest educated, wealthiest voters. That's the first time that's happened. So that means we're not doing as well with the voters who supported President Trump, with the folks who supported Republicans into the Senate, middle-class voters, working-class voters across all ethnicities. So clearly we have to rethink our messaging because it's not working.
Colin, if you were to put yourself in Democratic shoes, if you could.
Glad I'm not.
Do they oppose everything? Do they oppose some things? Or should they just kind of sit back and see where this all goes?
Reflexive opposition is not what voters are looking for right now. The challenges we face are too serious. And we saw this in the 2022 midterms when Republicans ran just solely against Biden and it didn't actually win them. It's because they didn't have a vision of their own. You got to offer people something. I actually think the Democrat who's going to be able to do this is the one who takes Trump arguments and says, yep, I agree, this is a problem, but here's a different solution. But right now, what you're seeing from the leaders behind us in Washington, it's all just reflexive and opposition to everything he does, and voters just aren't in the mood for that.
So President Trump has revoked the security clearance for President Biden, who rejected or revoked the security clearance of President Trump, Al. Mostly this is very symbolic, and it's, I guess, a way of saying that the two men really don't have much respect for one another. What do you make of all that?
I think it's symbolic and theatrical, which is a lot of what President Trump does. And sometimes in our party, we jump and grab the bait, which we shouldn't do. But if you're going to bring up security, let's talk about the fact that, again, Doge has gone into and looked at millions of people's private information, number one. Number two, the president has fired over 100 people at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Number three, the administration has said to staff of the CIA, take a buyout. So if you think of, say, 25 people who might have taken that buyout of the CIA, what were they doing? What important mission were they working on? Do we care as a country if our national security has been undermined by these actions? So again, that's why I say they're going at this with a sledgehammer, blowing things up. Not good for America, but you're right, Colin, that Democrats haven't figured out a way to message on this.
Yeah,
because
Colin,
we shouldn't be standing in front of buildings yelling, let us in. The federal government is separate from the Congress. That's why we have a separation of powers. They don't have a right to go into those buildings.
And Colin, very quickly, is there a risk here of that happening, of going overboard here?
Of course. But there's also a risk of doing nothing, and the current status quo is unsustainable. And as they all say, an unsustainable situation won't be sustained.
Colin Reed, Al Mottur, thanks so much.
Thanks, Rich.
Appreciate it.
With you.